Hi, this is the Business Guy. So, why is Putin so obsessed with Ukraine? And why is Russia amassing troops on the Ukrainian border? And who knows, by the time you watch this, maybe Russia has already invaded Ukraine, and doing so could tank the stock market, and the market hates uncertainty. It could plunge the world into a wider war, which nobody wants. So here's the answer. I did a lot of research. I'm going to give you the answer and the reason why these things are happening. And if you appreciate me doing all this research and boiling it down for you, please click the like button below so YouTube promotes it. Thanks so much. And you can also click the subscribe button so that when more videos come out like this, you'll be up to date right away. Now, the two countries, Russia and Ukraine, have been linked since the 9th century. They speak similar languages. And during the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became independent. So Russia, or the Soviet Union, lost control of 14 former Soviet states it once had control over. And Ukraine was the most difficult. Since the end of the Cold War, NATO has moved eastward and has taken over 14 new countries, including some former Soviet states. And in a little bit, we're going to watch a Reuters report, a news report, kind of explaining and illustrating what's going on. So hang on a little bit and we'll go into this in detail and I'll show you some pictures. So NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, if you've attacked one of us, you've attacked all of us. So Ukraine has a promise to someday become a NATO member, and Russia feels that this is a security threat. Now we're going to do some analogies here so we can understand this better. Now Ukraine has conducted joint military exercises with NATO, and Russia feels Ukraine could become a launch site for missiles aimed at Russia. So Russia wants NATO to withdraw the promise to bring Ukraine in as a NATO member. Now when Russia took over Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, Putin gained quite a broad favor from the Russian public. So now he wants to bring all or part of Ukraine under Russia's rule. So though I'm personally against Russia taking over Ukraine as an American, I put together this analogy to try to understand why they're making such a big deal over this. Say Russia started forming alliances with South America. Maybe they started in a tip down in Chile. And so they keep growing their expansion of their treaty with other countries, and they're coming farther and farther north. So as they do this, if the U.S. needed to one day, say, invade a country down there, say like the U.S. did in Panama, when Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega was taking financial kickbacks to let drug dealers run loads of illegal drugs through the Panama Canal, if we needed to do something like that, if Panama and Russia had an alliance, Russia would start hurling bombs at us. Then say Russia had formed alliances with all or most of the countries in South America. It had formed alliances in Central America. Now they had a promise to bring Mexico in on the Russian alliance. And then maybe eventually even Canada as well. Now that would really feel threatening to all of us, wouldn't it? That Russia could plant missiles on our border countries aimed right at us. So that's why Russia is making such a big deal out of this. Now let's go ahead and review the Reuters video on this topic.
Why is Russia's Putin so focused on Ukraine? Ukraine has become the main flashpoint in Russia's relations with the West, after a series of tough statements from President Vladimir Putin and a build-up of tens of thousands of Russian troops near its border.
If Russia further...
So it's like if Russia wanted for Mexico to become part of their treaty, it might plant missiles aimed at us there in Mexico, and we amass troops at the Mexican border to try to stop that alliance from happening. That's what this is analogous to from our perspective.
Invades Ukraine, there will be significant costs and consequences.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades.
The risk of a conflict is real.
This isn't...
So, in other words, they want to invade Ukraine to prevent this alliance from happening, to prevent NATO placing missiles in Ukraine aimed at them. So that's what this is all about.
Extremely dangerous situation. We're now at a stage where Russia could at any point launch an attack.
Here are 3 reasons why Putin feels so strongly about Ukraine and has chosen to bring the crisis to a head. With the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia lost control of 14 former republics it had previously dominated. But the loss of Ukraine was the bitterest pill. Many Russians feel a connection with Ukraine that they do not feel towards other former Soviet states. The two had been linked since the 9th century and speak closely related languages. Putin has said Russians and Ukrainians were one people who shared a single historic and spiritual space. Since the Cold War ended, NATO has expanded eastwards by
Yeah, so they're closely linked, and as we talked about, Ukraine was once part of the Soviet Union, and so they have very, very close ties. So it's like, let's say if Mexico was once part of the United States and then they separated from us, well, we'd feel a greater tie to Mexico, or let's say, or Canada was part of the U.S. at one time, and so we'd feel a greater connection with that country.
taking in 14 new countries, including states that were once in the Soviet Union.
So there you go. NATO has expanded into 14 new countries after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and many of those countries were former Soviet states, like we talked about before.
For Russia, this was a threatening encroachment towards its borders.
Так серьезную озабоченность вызывает наращивание непосредственно у российских границ военной группировки США и НАТО.
While Ukraine is not a NATO member, it has a promise it will eventually get to join.
So there's the big threat. They have a promise they could eventually join NATO, and that's a bordering country to Russia. And that's where they're feeling a little scared and threatened by that.
Since toppling a pro-Russian president in 2014, it has moved closer to the West and staged joint military exercises with NATO. Putin says Ukraine's growing ties with the alliance could make it a launchpad for NATO missiles targeted at Russia.
There you go. That's the big deal. Right there. That's the big deal.
He wants security guarantees from the West, including the rescinding of NATO's membership promise to Kiev. As a leader who tolerates virtually no domestic opposition, Putin has a strong aversion to revolutions in neighboring countries.
So there you go. As you know, if anybody tries to run against the guy, he has him poisoned. So he's not used to getting opposition, at least from within his country. And so, so he doesn't like not getting his way.
Encourage protests in Russia. Ukraine is potentially threatening for Putin if it inspires Russians with a pro-Western vision. Keeping the West guessing about a possible invasion of Ukraine has put Russia high on the international agenda and forced US President Joe Biden to re-engage with Putin in a video call in December.
So I guess better talking than hurling bombs at each other. At least you're not losing lives when you're talking.
Recent interview, Putin mourned the collapse of the Soviet Union as the demise of historical Russia. Some analysts argue such statements suggest Putin sees Ukraine as unfinished business and wants to follow the seizure of Crimea, which boosted his popularity in Russia, to bring part or all of Ukraine back under.
So we're threatening economic sanctions, but we've done economic sanctions in Cuba for well over 50 years, almost 60. They're still communist. We did economic sanctions in Venezuela. It didn't make the leaders go run away and hide. And economic sanctions they hurt the other side economically. Iran, for example. But they don't just the leaders just don't tuck tail and run when that happens. So
Moscow's rule.
So anyway, I hope that helps understand why Putin is making such a big deal out of Ukraine and why they're talking about invading and why they're amassing troops, just like the U.S. would probably amass troops on the Mexican border or the Canadian border if one of these two countries or both were trying to form an alliance with Russia. So that's the reason why. And I don't like it. I don't think anybody likes it, but that's what's going on. And that's really the motive for this build-up and for this build-up in tension. Hope you enjoyed this. Please click like, subscribe, and share this video. This is The Business Guy.